My castaway this week is an artist. She was taught at an early age to take her profession seriously. She makes her work her best friend, getting up early and painting or sculpting until the light has gone. She's a figurative artist, and her pictures can be seen, among other places, in the National Portrait Gallery and in the National Gallery, where she was the very first artist in residence 25 years ago. Although she enjoys laughter a lot, her work is often preoccupied with death. She drew her mother, her father and her lover in their decline and in death, and one of her most celebrated and controversial sculptures is of Oscar Wilde rising from his coffin, smoking and laughing. The most real time for me, she says, is when I'm working. The rest, she adds in a rather Shakespearean phrase, is just the rest. She is Maggi Hambling. It's an all-consuming business, then, this, Maggie, is it? But if it's your best friend, your work, your art, then it's no great hardship, I presume.
Well, someone once said to me that one's never alone when one's working. And unless the work is one's best friend, I think one might as well not do it. It has to be the absolute priority of life.
So you can go to it whatever you're feeling. You don't have to be in the mood for work. It is like a best friend. You go when you're miserable or when you're happy.
When you're miserable, whether you're bored, whether you're tired, whether you're randy, whatever you're feeling, you can go to your work and have a conversation with it. Sometimes I can work on a painting for 2, 3, 4 months and then have to destroy it. And that painting can happen in a morning, but it couldn't happen unless I'd done that piece of rubbish before it can happen.
And you use the phrase having a conversation, and again it's one of those phrases you use. Your sculpture of Oscar Wilde was called A Conversation with Oscar Wilde, wasn't it? Just tell me about that conversation.
Well, it's very important to me that my piece for Oscar Wilde is down on our level. I think a lot of people think of him as a dilettante, not in touch with humanity, and he was a great humanitarian. And as it's a portrait of Oscar, I think that you enter into a conversation with that person, a visual conversation. I mean, there's a common humanity, and that confrontation, that conversation is what interests me in great portraits, and what it is I try to do in my own work. We
should remind people that it was unveiled, your Oscar Wilde, in 1998, I think, just off the corner of Trafalgar Square, and he's in his coffin, as we say, sarcophagus, isn't he? It's sort of polished and marble, and he's rising from it, having fun, really, isn't he?
Yeah, triumph. I mean, his work being the triumph over death, of course.
But the thing about it is that people use him. They sit on his coffin, don't they?
They have a drink, they have a chat,
they
get
eat their sandwiches at lunchtime.
Yeah, it's good.
It's lovely. I mean, that's what
a man of the people, yes.
But Oscar Wilde is special to you. Oscar Wilde is a kind of thread that's run through your life for some reason. Can you explain that?
Well, his stories for children were read to us at my first school in Hadley in Suffolk, and I heard this voice which seemed to come from another place. And so Picture of Dorian Gray was the first novel I read at the age of 12. I think it may have had some effect.
OK, record number 1. What are you going to take?
Well, I'm going to take Michael McLemore, the Queen of Ireland, delivering a little bit of conversation between Lady Bracknell and John Worthing from The Importance of Being Oscar.
I don't know who I am by birth. I was found. The late Mr. Thomas Cardew, an old gentleman of extraordinarily kindly and charitable disposition, found me. Yes, and he gave me the name of Worthing because he happened to have a first-class ticket for Worthing in his pocket at the time. Worthing is a place in Sussex, Lady Bracknell. It's a seaside resort. And where did the charitable gentleman with the first-class ticket for this seaside resort find you? In a handbag. A handbag! Yes, Lady Bracknell, I was in a handbag. It was a somewhat large, old-fashioned black leather handbag with handles to it. Perfectly ordinary handbag.
That was Michael McLemore in the roles of both Lady Bracknell and Ernest Worthing in a 1964 performance of his one-man show, The Importance of Being Oscar. Of course, Maggie, an equally controversial sculpture of yours was unveiled a couple of years ago, I think, on the beach at Aldeburgh in memory of Benjamin Britten, and we'll come to that, more controversy. But let's talk about your paintings and the sorts of people you've painted in your time. Max Wall, Stephen Fry, George Melly, A.J.P. Taylor, all people really rather larger than life, and a certain raffish quality about them, it has to be said. Do you have to paint people to whose personalities you're attracted to?
Well, I think I've painted quite a contrasting lot of people. I can't imagine anyone much more different from George Melly than, for instance, Dorothy Hodgkin, the scientist. In a life's rich pageant, as Arthur Marshall called it, is very important to me, and the challenge of painting very different people. There was no plan. I try to get what's inside the person into the bronze or into the paint.
But somebody said that your Stephen Fry, which is hanging in the National Portrait Gallery, that he has, two different emotions, I think one in each eye. that he has a kind of wit and optimism in one part of him and then a kind of sense of tragedy in the other. Those are the kinds of characters, it seems to me, that you, because they have to inhabit you said, in order for you to be able to paint them, you've got to be really interested or to like them. That's my question. Do you have to like them? Do you have to...
I wouldn't take on a commission to paint someone with whom I felt no rapport. And certainly about Stephen Fry, I found the optimism, the wit in the right eye and the sense of tragedy and what can happen in life in the left eye. But it's very complicated. I mean, that's part of the point, that the truth of the person. I try to empty myself, become a channel for the truth of the person in front of me to come through me onto the canvas or into
Makes
the
you sound a bit like a medium, that you need to be inhabited by this person, let them into you and come through you.
Well, it's more, when someone is alive and sitting or standing there in front of me, then it's more simple, I suppose. But if I'm painting someone after they're dead, then it's because I'm inhabited by them, and that's a different matter.
We'll come to that different matter, but let's have record number 2.
It is George singing. Yes, it's a sweet song, especially written by John Chilton for George and his girlfriend Squeaky. I met Squeaky in the 80s making the art quiz gallery when George was the host, and I was a rather odd team captain and always lost and...
Turned out not to know much about the history of art.
Well, the other team captain was an art historian, so what would you expect?
But you were the star, I recall.
I think possibly something to do with wearing bow ties. I really wouldn't know. So. Anyway, they became, because of that, 3 series of that extraordinary business, 10 programmes in 5 days, and a lot of vodka. They remain two of my greatest friends, and it's a sweet, real love song.
I wanna go where you go, do what you do, love when you love, then I'll be happy. You can go north or south, you can go east or west, I'll follow you, sweetheart, and share your little love nest. I wanna go where you go, do what you do, love when you love, then I'll be happy.
George Melly, and then I'll be happy. I have to say, Maggie, at first glance, your background looks sturdily conventional, doesn't it? You lived in Suffolk in a Georgian house covered in wisteria. Your father was the chief cashier in the local Barclays Bank. Your mother became a school teacher. But that kind of isn't quite how it was either, is it? For a start, your brother wanted you to be a boy and treated you like one, huh?
Well, I think he guessed when my mother came back with me from Sudbury, where I'd been born, to Hadley, as a baby. He stood there and she had to confess that I was a girl rather than a boy. But he chose really to ignore that sort of technicality and brought me up as a brother. I mean, we did carpentry. I was once given a doll that was carved up pretty quickly in the woodshed, and it was much more useful for later life, really, to know a bit about carpentry and wringing chickens' necks. So I was a bit surprised when he sort of got into his teens, he started sort of practising French kissing on me, because it didn't quite go with the carpentry, but, that's how... Life is full of surprises, isn't it?
He was quite a bit older than you, wasn't he?
Yeah. My sister, 11 years older, and he 9 years older, yes.
Yeah. But you were apparently a difficult, perverse, obstinate, tricky, I read.
Perfectly natural and normal. No, my mother did say I was very obstinate, and I think there's nothing wrong with a little bit of perversity.
But she liked you to be neat and tidy, didn't she? She was quite a conventional woman.
Very conventional. The theatre was very important to both of them. My father was rather in the distance when I was a child. My mother was rather more mother and father to me. But my moments of seeing father in a very marvellous and glamorous light was when he performed in the Hadley Dramatic Society. He was very, very good on the stage. My mother had a taste for charades and really wanted home life to be a bit like an old card play, you know. They had completely opposite senses of humour, and at breakfast it was a bit like being with Punch and Judy.
And your father, you said, was a mysterious person throughout my childhood. What do you mean by mysterious?
Well, he was behind the Daily Telegraph, a very gruff person and rather a stranger. Out of the house a lot of the time and doing other things. And
he had another life?
He had another life.
A different life from the conventional home life?
Yeah. He had close male friends. I became aware in my teens. And it was extraordinary to think of my father, who had been a very gruff, distant person, also had an extremely feminine side. And why not?
And did you ever talk to him about that in later life?
In later life, yes. I mean, what brought us together was when he began to paint. You know, I'd left Camberwell and he retired from the bank and I gave him some paints. And 5 years later, when he was 65, quite nothing to do with me, he suddenly decided one morning to take out the paints and he started to paint. And he turned out to be a completely natural painter. I organised, I think, 7 shows for him.
Did he sell?
In Suffolk. Everything. We once showed together. I sold one, he sold a lot.
That's amazing.
Art, you know, brought us together. If I hadn't loved him as much as I did, I would then think I would have stopped work on my wild sculpture and painted him after he died for about 3 months. I was inhabited.
Record number 3.
So my mother was a great church person. She organised all the flower festivals and ran the Mothers' Union and that kind of thing. And so this is a bit for her and a bit for a very close friend of mine who it always causes to cry. And I think very few people can remain untouched. There shouldn't be a dry eye in the house after this one.
Dear Lord and Father of Mankind, sung by the choir of St Paul's Cathedral. The organist and conductor was John Scott. So, Maggi Hambling, you thought maybe that acting was going to be your escape route from life, as we all do when we're that small, but it turned out to be art, painting, drawing. When did that come into the frame, then?
Well, there was an art exam at school when I was 14, and I'd done nothing during the time except flick painted people and generally draw attention to myself because I was deeply in love with the biology mistress invigilating. And then I sort of happened to see the clock and it was 3:20, and I realised that at 3:30 we had to hand some paintings in. So there were 3 subjects and I chose laziness, and I painted a woman lying on a chaise longue with a book half open. In other words, you know, she was too lazy even to read. So, anyway, so I did this painting in 10 minutes, and then when the results came out 2 or 3 weeks later, I was top of art, and I thought, this is a very strange business. You don't have to try, and you're good at it. You know, so I sort of began to look into it.
And by amazing coincidence, on the edge of your village, Hadley, was a very, very good art school called Benton End. I mean, it was very lucky for you. Tell me about it.
Well, it was run by Let Haynes and Cedric Morris, and so I took my first 2 Suffolk landscapes, my first 2 oils, one summer evening, and Let came to the door. He was very frightening. And I said, "Is Sir Cedric Morris at home, please?" And he said, "Cedric Morris is having his dinner," like that. And so I said, "May I wait?" Because I wasn't going to go away, you know. And so I went in, and there was a long table, and Cedric was sitting at the end. And Cedric was very chatty and giggly and nice. And then Let said, "I suppose you're still at school?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, perhaps we'd better come along, Pains, in the holidays." So the first day of the holidays I was there, but I was too scared to go up the bit of drive. And I sat in the ditch outside the gates and painted the ditch until someone eventually came and found me.
But they taught you, I mean, they gave you all the grounding that you really were going to need, didn't they? They
well,
taught
Let,
you it was
really, Let. I
Yeah.
mean, he was the one whose work was extraordinarily imaginative. He's the person that said to me, "Make your work your best friend." But he had rather given his life to the, to making Cedric's career. But he's an extraordinary artist in his own right.
Record number 4.
And so from that to London. So it was London, it was the 60s. I was one of the privileged people to be an art student in swinging London. And I had arrived in London, nearly 19, believe it or not, as a virgin. And I sort of thought I'd better do something about this. It was rather embarrassing. I'd made my mother buy a full-length black leather coat, a lot of makeup. I'd dyed my hair crimson, wore her fox fur around my neck. I, in fact, looked like the madame of a brothel. And in the first year, the other girls came to me for advice on contraception. I really cannot imagine what I instructed them to do. However, I had a sort of list of pretty basic kind of possibilities of who one might go to bed with. And so sort of there was a younger man, older man, black man, woman. I worked my way through the list eventually at the end of the first year of Camberwell, and I liked the ladies best. So this is Dusty Springfield and the memory of the Gateways Club in the King's Road and a lot of hot, sweaty dancing.
Left alone with just a memory. Life seems dead and so unreal. All that's left is loneliness. There's nothing left to feel. You don't have to say you love me, just speak close at hand.
Dusty Springfield and You Don't Have to Say You Love Me. How did your mother, Maggie, react to this change in this baby daughter whom she'd always turned out looking so beautiful?
She was not too pleased, which I thought was a bit greedy of her. I mean, my sister married with 3 sons, my brother married with a son. I mean, I think she was being rather greedy. But what sorted her out was being such a church person. She went away on a weekend retreat to a monastery somewhere, and she went into the room, or the cell, I suppose, and very bravely said, "I have one daughter, one son, but the third daughter is," and she said, that's a rather embarrassing word, I far prefer the word dyke, lesbian. And so the monk, who was obviously a very civilised person, than anything else about the monk, said, "I do hope you haven't ever held it against her. Let us kneel down and pray that she meets people who she will love," you know? And so that sorted her out.
Mum got sorted. Your career took off, meanwhile. You had your first exhibition in the early 70s, I think.
Yes.
And if we spool on, by 1980, you, age 35, you were the National Gallery's first artist in residence. How did it work for you, that? How did you interact with the public, or did you hide away and try not to?
Well, my studio was a converted children's sandwich room with no windows, and as I smoked in those glorious days, they had entirely encased the inside of the room with tin foil. So I felt rather like a ready-made meal, you know. Anyway, the notices around the gallery said, "Meet a real artist," you know, and sort of like one was a bit of a monkey, you know, they were inviting people to come along to poke your clothing or something. Anyway, on a Wednesday afternoon, the public arrived at 4:00 outside my studio, and I took them down into the collection and around half a dozen paintings that I loved and which I talk to them about why I loved them. And then we came back up to the studio, and inevitably, every Wednesday afternoon, this German lady would ask me if I saw auras. Every Wednesday. It was like a punishment.
Come on, number 5.
Number 5, Beethoven String Quartet. In the early 70s, I was opened up by someone who became a muse and encouraged me to paint people, again, having been through a lot of experiments at the Slade, and being very keen on very classical music. I think she tried to raise the tone of my taste a bit, and she gave me this record. I don't know if it's worked.
Part of the second movement of Beethoven's String Quartet in C-sharp minor, played by the Hungarian Quartet. You say that the woman who introduced you to that piece of music opened you up. I suppose really the strongest example of a sitter inhabiting the artist, in your case, was personified by Henrietta Moraes, who came into your life in 1998. And you drew her and painted her such a lot, and did sculptures of her. But there was a larger-than-life figure, wasn't she? I mean, tell me about her. She was an incredible figure.
Well, as I'm sure you know, she was the Queen of Soho in the 50s and a hippie in the 60s. She was painted by Francis Bacon, I think 16 times.
And Freud.
And Freud a bit in the early part of it, yes. And she was, a very great beauty and a very strong personality.
But she'd led a rackety old life, hadn't she?
Well, she'd led a life, you know. Depends on your idea of life.
Well,
she was a liver, and in the end it was her liver that got her. But I mean, she lived.
But it was oiled by drink and drugs, huh?
Oh, you know, in one of her obituaries, there was the line that moderation was unknown to her. My father's funeral had been on a Monday, beginning of 98, and on Wednesday there was a dinner at the Haywood following the opening of a Bacon show. And as I was going to leave, there she was by the door, and she sort of spread out her arms, and there was this great beauty and sort of force of nature saying, "When am I coming to dinner?" And the funny thing was, at the time she only had one tooth. So I thought, not going to be much dinner. But anyway, in due course, she came, and I was working on my portraits of father laughing, father flirting, the big heads of my father after he died. And her, my dog, Percy, began to Roger her dog, Max, and she looked across the studio and said, "Oh, good, they're getting on all right. Great."
And she took over your life, really, didn't she? Or she took over you in many ways. Hmm?
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, one was, yeah, absolutely.
But in the end, she was on the path to death, wasn't she, as you say? Cirrhosis of the liver was there. What happened? Were you with her when she died?
I was with her when she died, yes. I was really cross and said, "Look, you need the doctor. You're really ill. At least can I telephone your doctor?" And so I telephoned the doctor. And went over to the sink for some reason, and then came back. She said, "Come here, give me a hug and another cigarette." And she actually died on the telephone to a doctor, cracking a joke. A marvellous way to die. A lesson in how to die.
Number 6.
Well, this glorious bit of Noel Coward takes me back to Henrietta in every way, because there are a great many possibilities of what to fall in love with in this record, and Henrietta, I think, had and did most of them.
We are told that Every hormone does it. Victor Borge all alone does it. Let's do it. Let's fall in love. Each tiny clam you consume does it. Even Liberace we assume does it. Let's do it. Let's fall in love.
Noel Coward and Let's Do It. That was recorded live in Las Vegas in 1955. Yeah, that's a bit more kind of outre than we normally hear, isn't it?
Good.
So you drew Henrietta in death. Many, many times you'd drawn her as she was dying, and other people, your mother and your father and a neighbour. I mean, you're painting My Mother Dead. It was bought by the British Museum, I think, wasn't it? There's a certain joke, isn't there, that you're going to go down in history as Maggie Coffin Hambling.
That's one of George's witty remarks, yeah.
But it does sound macabre, or at least unnatural
for an artist, it seemed to me the most natural thing in the world. I mean, with my mother, she was very bad at posing when she was alive. She would arrange her hair, and we'd start to do a drawing, and she'd have her spectacles on, and she'd take them off, and then she'd say, "Have you finished?" after about 3 minutes. So, when I drew my mother in her coffin, I did sort of say to myself, "Gotcha now, mother. Not going anywhere now."
But what can you capture in death that you can't capture in life?
There's a strange beauty. I mean, my mother was quite ill towards the end of her life, and all that sort of pain had gone from the face, and she was smiling. I mean, almost smiling. I mean, still very much there if you are very close to someone, and I mean, they happen to have died, but I mean, they're going to go on inside you. I mean, that's something to do with love, isn't it? That, I mean, they go on inside you.
Mm. But you charted as well the paths to death on several occasions. So certainly with your father, you drew and painted him much more, didn't you, in the last few months of his life?
Yeah.
I mean, what is it you're after in those moments?
Well, you don't want to leave someone, do you? I mean, if you can clearly see that they're in the process, if you like, of leaving you.
So it's the emotion of it all that you're after.
You say emotion, Sue, I say fact. There's no getting away from it. Is there? It's one thing that we can't deny. It's the biggest mystery. I mean, the greatest works of art have that quality. You know, in a great work of art, I think you know what it is to be alive, and you also get a bit of sense of what it is to die. I mean, I think it's really good Mexico, sort of death as a friend, and just the other half of life, the other side of the coin. We sort of shove it all underground, shove it away here, pretend it doesn't happen. And it does.
Record number 7.
Record number 7, Benjamin Britten. My friend Keith Milo played the War Requiem quite a lot in our flat in Greenwich in the 60s, and I shall never forget the sort of electricity that went through me the first time I heard his music. And I think it's what happens if you're in the presence of genius.
Lacrimosa dies illa, On This Day Full of Tears, from Benjamin Britten's War Requiem, sung by Galina Vishnevskaya with the Bach Choir and London Symphony Orchestra Chorus, and the London Symphony Orchestra conducted by the composer Benjamin Britten, whose sculpted memorial you unveiled a couple of years ago at Aldeburgh, Scallop, it's called, a shell shape, which on the beach at Aldeburgh, created shell shock, frankly, in his hometown, didn't it? They rose up, well, they got into an old tiz about it.
Some of them still are. Rather surprisingly, I thought. Being a bit slow, I really thought that the people of Aldeburgh would be grateful to me for making this contemporary celebration of, their greatest son, for goodness sake.
Mm.
And it came very sort of simply from the simple idea of when you're a child, you hold a shell to your ear and you can hear the sounds of the sea. And that's how it began. And then, a lot of scallop shells, and the scallop being the symbol of the sea and a pilgrimage and the cradle of Venus. It's got a great many things going for it.
And how is it going down now? It's still sitting there on the beach. Are they liking it any better, do we know?
Well, some do, some don't. So.
But they sit on it.
They do. They sit on it.
They sit on Oscar.
They sit on it. Lovers make love underneath it. Children climb all over it. It's user-friendly.
OK, last question. We talked a lot about death, Maggie, and yours has to come at some time, by the sea perhaps, on a desert island perhaps, but you are so close to it in the sense that you have seen so many, you have recorded so many, you've recorded people in death. Does it make you, what you were saying just now about it just being the other side of the coin, do you feel that cavalier about your own death?
Not at all. No. Whichever saint it was who said, make me good, but not yet. Not yet. I mean, this is where we're so lucky as painters, poets, writers. So lucky we don't retire. We don't have to stop. We go on and on and on, we hope, until we die with a brush or something in our hand.
But do we approach it without fear? Because
no,
we're so
not.
Familiar with it.
Certainly not. I'm not philosophical about it. I'm afraid of it. We don't know where we're going, do we?
Last record.
My favourite film by a million miles is Some Like It Hot. And I've chosen this record because I think for me, it's one of Marilyn Monroe's greatest manifestations. She wiggles up the railway carriage carrying the band to the Millionaire's Resort. And did you know that she had one heel of one shoe always higher than the other to increase the wobble? Not very good for the back, very good for the bank balance, I think, but not so good for the back. But what a sexy image that is, because she was really curvy then. And she comes up that aisle singing.
Running wild.
Marilyn Monroe, all too briefly, singing Running Wild from the original soundtrack of Some Like It Hot, and that was released in 1959. Now, here's the question you've been dreading, Maggie, the one you can't answer. Which one of the 8 would you take if you could only take one?
Well, you've had some awfully good technicians here. Could they sort of splice
Marilyn? We want to know the answer.
Splice Marilyn into the late Beethoven quartet. Don't you think that'd be good? An original number?
What about your book? You get the Bible, you get Shakespeare.
The Complete Works of Just William by Richmond Crompton. I always identified with William, and when at the deepest moments of doom and gloom, I can take out a Just William book and they still make me laugh, and he somehow finds a way. Whatever is against him, William gets there in the end. Hero.
And your luxury.
Ah, yes. My luxury is the wine cellars of All Souls, Oxford, which some people don't know this, but in the wine cellars of All Souls, Oxford, there's a long-legged blonde bunny girl serving the drinks. I wouldn't be quite on my own on a desert island.
Don't tell me about her. We'll stick with the claret. Maggi Hambling, thank you very much indeed for letting us hear your Desert Island Discs.
You've been listening to a podcast from the Desert Island Discs archive. For more podcasts, please visit bbc.co.uk/Radio 4.